Hey, this is Nick with B&H, and we are live here in New York City at the B&H Superstore, here in our tech corner specifically, and we are here today to talk about this, the brand new Nikon Z8. Now, as you can see, we have an amazing panel here of professionals who've had some time to play with the camera. They're going to be chatting about their experience with the camera. We're going to go over the specs of it. We're going to answer some questions. But before we do all of that, I would first like to introduce this amazing panel we have. And Jerry, you are closest. It is easiest for me, so we will start with you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Jerry Ghionis, Nikon Ambassador. I shoot portraits, wedding, fashion, boudoir, anything with a human in it I really enjoy. Recently been photographing equestrian and my pet Zoe, which is amazing, but born and raised in Melbourne, Australia, live in Las Vegas, and so happy to be here.
Awesome, welcome to the East Coast.
Thank you.
Sharrone.
Sharrone Calafiore, wedding filmmaker. This is my area right here, usually weddings right here in the city. Born and raised in Jersey.
It's right across the river. Welcome.
Yeah,
and Mike.
Hey Nick, well thank you for having us. My name is Mike Corrado. I've been with Nikon for 38 years in about 18 different jobs. Most recently I'm the head of NPS and I run the Nikon Ambassador program, but I guess I would consider myself the elder of the group, being at Nikon almost 39 years come October.
Yeah, we don't have to say ages here. This is a safe
Sorry.
space. Don't
It just
worry.
gives me some history and a reason
We have to
why.
respect our elder, is what we're
do.
saying.
We absolutely will. We'll see. But so we obviously are going to be talking about the camera for the most part, but just a few quick things before we get started. First of all, if you happen to be in New York City, we will have the Z8 available here to demo in the store until 4 o'clock today. So if you rush, you can still make it. Just call out sick. We won't tell anyone. And then also, we're going to be answering some questions a little bit towards the end that were asked in the comments of our YouTube video that we released for this yesterday, as well as the Instagram reel we did. So stay tuned for that, and we'll be answering those questions. Now, Mike, I think I want to start with you on this camera, because I'm sure a sizable percentage of the people watching this have already devoured every single video review for this camera, have read all the specs, but for those who are new to the Z8 or possibly new to the Z ecosystem with Nikon in general, what is your 30-second elevator pitch on what the Z8 is and what features it has?
Before I pitch, I would love to say if you're online or you're here in the store, you can pre-order today at B&H. So
Yes, one last shameless plug.
that's a possibility. No, the Z8 is a little bit of everything to everybody. If you're a hybrid shooter, you shoot video or you shoot still, or you do both, this is what the Z8 is all about. Now, born from the DNA of a Z9, which has already been out there and tested, a marvelous camera, think about all that power in a more compact body with some subtle changes to each. I mean, with video, on the video side, if you love 8K or you love shooting 4K, you've got that 8K 60p, 4K 120p, all kinds of video packed features within the camera that these two amazing artists can talk about. But for me, I'm a still guy, the still side of things. We're talking about a 47.5 megapixel file, frame rates at RAW 20 frames per second, JPEG 30 frames per second, 120 frames per second at 11 megapixels, plus all the benefits of autofocus capabilities with detection of scenes. 9 different scenes can be detected: eyes, animals, objects, airplanes, motorcycles, you name it. So it's just got a little bit of everything for everybody, but the form factor is what it's all about. The Z9 is a bigger, more robust flagship camera. The Z8 has all that robust power, but in a much smaller package.
Wow.
A little over 30 seconds, but...
No, but you kind of hit all the points that I had to memorize for the video that we did.
We're done.
Yeah, we're done. Thank you so much for joining us. No.
It's your turn, Jerry.
Well, actually, yeah, Jerry, because to kind of kick off the discussion of like the experience of shooting with the camera,
Right.
You had 2 quotes that you said to me that I wrote down, so I would not forget them because they were so good. You described the Z8, and this is coming from a Nikon ambassador. You said the Z8 is, quote, predictably good and, quote, the most exciting, unexciting release, which I agree with 100%. But for people who haven't played with the camera yet, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's funny because the Z9's quality has been well established for the past year and a half. Camera of the year and all that kind of stuff in many organizations, and then all of a sudden this camera comes out and the specs are pretty much the same other than the vertical grip, and the form factor is so good, and it's predictably amazing because the Z9's quality has been well established, and now all of a sudden it's in this beautiful form factor. So the reviews and all the stuff that you'll see, it's going to be exactly the same. And if you're loving the Z9, which I have, I've shot it exclusively for the past sort of year and a half, and now this one suits me perfectly because that's that perfect form factor. It's a nice hybrid between photography and filmmaking. It's that sweet spot for me.
Yeah, and actually on the note of filmmaking, Sharrone, you described yourself, you're obviously, you're a wedding filmmaker, but the phrase Nikon video shooter, I feel like is something that in the past you may not have heard very often, but has been increasingly more common with the Z line. What is it about because correct me if I'm wrong, were you shooting on the Z9 prior to this?
So I come from a completely different system. Nikon is brand new to me, and that's one thing that I want to say is that, so for me it's exciting. It's very exciting. I'm not too familiar with the Z9. I use the Z9 maybe for like a couple of shoots. So the Z8 for someone that is not coming from a Nikon system is insanely exciting because of all the features that I'm experiencing that I wasn't able to take advantage of from on my old system. Yes.
Such as like autofocus? I think
yes.
we talked a lot about that.
Yes, and I have the clips to prove it.
We might have
I showed them to you on my phone.
Yes.
So I personally love when we're shooting preps or portraits. I love shooting from the perspective of behind the photographer, shooting a bride and groom. And for the most part, I love it. I love when things go in and out of my lens. So I don't normally shoot in autofocus because of that, because then the autofocus needs to like come.
Freaks
the
out, starts
autofocus
looking
needs to
for
reset.
something else.
On this camera, it just I don't know how I don't know how, but I mean, and I showed it to you, so I have the proof. It doesn't even budge. It stays on the subject and it sticks on the subject. Jerry, you were the one in front of my lens.
I'm a big guy.
I did it on purpose. And in an instance where someone would walk, you also walked in front of my lens. It just doesn't budge. It doesn't budge off the subject. So I'm excited, especially for a live event, to take advantage of the autofocus on this camera, which I've never been able to rely on before, ever.
Yeah. Well, actually, we're obviously going to get to questions later, but one thing I can already say that came up a lot were people had questions about the autofocus in this camera for both photography and video. Some of them were just specific about how it compares to like the D850 or the Z9. As far as I was aware, this essentially inherits all of the same autofocus algorithms from the Z9, but is there anything more to that?
No, that is it. I mean, that's why this is such a powerhouse. When you take all that technology that, as Jerry mentioned, it's tried and true. And I think, Jerry, the word you use for how it works is sorcery. It's magic.
It's a technical term.
There's
What
a
is
lot
this
of years of
sorcery?
engineering here and a lot of thought behind this, and scene detection, eye detection, all of those things, help make up this system. The beauty of it all is looking at this format. You can actually focus to the corners of the frame, 90% of the frame horizontal and vertical, which is so amazing. But what the camera's doing in the way of engineering and its speed to see subjects, be able to move with the subjects, and on the video side have control of the speed of the focus and the racking, and you guys can speak to that experience more. You have more control than you've ever had before. So it's identical to the Z9, and that's part of the beauty of introducing the Z8. It's got all that power.
Yeah, actually, it's funny, Sharrone, we were chatting about autofocus. I remember we were doing the equestrian shooting, and I remember we were
You guys
both
get all the audio of me going, "Oh my God, this is
over and over
unbelievable.
again. We're gonna have to
I
bleep
can't
any of that,
believe
but,
this."
But I remember we were both kind of gushing about how good the autofocus was, and I found out we were using two completely different autofocusing modes. Because I think I was in, I'm trying to remember, it was like wide area, and then I went to subject tracking, and then I went to animal for like horses.
Yeah.
I think you had done something different, and
Yeah.
we're getting, because you said it was able to stick on the eye of the rider, right? And it did
Yeah.
not lose it.
So again, this is not something I'm used to. Mike actually introduced me to Scene Detect. Basically, you point the camera and it knows exactly what to focus on. And in the case of the horse jumping, it knew to it literally. And I just kind of I did this on purpose. I was on an 85-1.2 just to test it, really test it. And I just kind of stayed still and let the horses jump, and the camera literally just detected the eye of the rider. The eye of the rider.
There's a theme song there.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, and until they went out of the frame, and then the next rider would come up behind, and it would just catch right onto the next rider's eye. It was unbelievable. So
Yeah.
it wasn't on eye focus or follow focus. It was on scene detect. So all I had to do was point the camera, and it knew what to focus on.
Yeah, actually, we're showing a clip right now of some of the video that you've got. Just this amazing reel. So like there, for instance, you had autofocus on when you were shooting through that sort of like chandelier thing, or was that
right there?
Oh,
I
yeah.
had autofocus on. I actually had autofocus. I was putting this camera, the autofocus especially, because for me it was like a personal thing to really experience. Again, 85-1.2 on that shot through those sheer curtains, and yeah, it was on autofocus. All this was on autofocus. That was my thing with the camera on these shoots. It was really testing the autofocus.
Yeah, no, it was. It was funny when we were shooting with the camera. Like we had a marathon shooting session with it, and it was only towards the end of it that I was like, oh, I was starting to kind of realize like this is the autofocus mode I should be using going forward, and that was right around the time we had to give the cameras back. But I definitely was interested in playing with the camera a little bit more.
We did have to take them back.
Yes,
It wasn't
pry them from our
But you bring
hands.
up such a great point of the autofocus, having the options. When you go back into the legacy of the D5, D6, and D850, you said before, the focusing capabilities of those cameras, targeting within the center generally, but bringing to us things like dynamic focus or 3D tracking in the D series, the high-end D series. Now you've got that in the Z8. You've got all those options that we've had in the past, plus all of the new options of scene detection.
Because I'm actually glad you brought that up, because I feel like the main people probably looking at this camera aren't necessarily current Z9 owners. I think it's a lot of people, either Nikon shooters or people new to Nikon, who are kind of waiting to see what the next thing was. So for Nikon shooters, say like who have a D850, I know that you said that this is kind of seen as the spiritual successor to that camera, the true sort of successor. Why would you say that? Because I know obviously it shares the same batteries, the form factor is a little bit closer, but is there anything else about the DNA of like the 850 that's in this?
The D850, I mean, let's face it, was one of the most historical cameras we've ever introduced, the most sought after camera. A lot of it has to do with the form factor and the size, right? Even with the higher end flagships that are bigger, better balanced with maybe long telephoto lenses like a 600, this has a sweet spot. And of course, being able to add a grip to it, you have the versatility of the size, right out of the gate. I think anybody that's looking at a D850, it was one of my favorite cameras with the resolution and the abilities of the camera and the focus capabilities. Now you're looking at mirrorless technologies. For me, right away I noticed I went from shooting automatically, everything's a manual because of the electronic viewfinder. Getting used to the electronic viewfinder was one of the greatest successes I've had. There are lenses in here that the engineers have built to make it a great sharp experience, and the color accuracy is just incredible. So all of the abilities of speed of shooting, silent shooting, all favor mirrorless cameras now. And I think this is the time where someone's got to seriously look into moving to the mirrorless side, because that is where the industry is.
Gotcha. Actually, while you mentioned it, and I think it's kind of hiding here, I don't know if we can see it, but there is a battery grip that Nikon is going to be selling with this. And honestly, we'll talk about the specific differences between the Z9 and the Z8 a little bit later, but if you attach the battery grip to the Z8, you're getting close to comparable battery life to the Z9. But the nice thing is, as you were talking about, I like the modularity of it. Like you have the option to have a super lightweight sort of rig if you want, and then if you really need the battery life, you have the option to add that.
Can I just add something? Something to all this? It's funny because I've come from shooting weddings and portraits only, and most of my subjects are very static and still. Yeah, you might get a bride and groom walking and all that kind of stuff, but I was very much of the focus, recompose, and shoot. Focus, recompose, shoot, and I'd allow more depth of field so they're not moving out of my depth of field. And then I got to the point where I'd actually move the focus point to the point that I'm actually shooting and going from there. I know a lot of people that come from my world are like that. So they're not used to moving in motion. So you never rely on it. The fact is that if you haven't experienced the Z9, or in this case now the Z8, the ability to actually change your focus modes, take advantage of the camera where you're doing all the hard work. So your muscle memory is all about, I'm doing the hard work, I know how to do it, I've done it for years and it's okay. And I'm just saying to you, coming from that purist approach, it's very, very liberating, because you've just taken off one massive thing off the table, where if you have a static sort of subject and you're there photographing a portrait and having fun and they're giggling along a bit and they're moving into a different depth of field, well, you've got the shot. Yes. And my encouragement is that we also understand the focus modes, rather than just always use the same focus mode. Use the different ones, learn them, read the manual and test them when the pressure is off you.
So for like some of these photos that we're seeing here that you took, were like for the wedding photography, like you would think, okay, the 3D tracking would probably work fine, but did you switch between any focusing modes, like kind of what you were describing?
Yeah, so when, like in these ones, like for this one, for example, like if I'm using a macro lens or something, I might use pinpoint focus. A lot of people don't know that that exists, where you can actually make the focus point even smaller, so you can choose where to focus. Because at the end of the day, are you photographing on the glass of the eye? Are you photographing on the sclera, the iris, the pupil, the eyelash? Where are you photographing? And sometimes that's really important on a shallow depth of field. Or a macro lens at 2.8 behaves like a 1.4 lens. And there's a couple of shots that may be coming up. You're photographing through the material, which is crazy, because how does it know to shoot through texture and where to go and all that kind of stuff? So, and this stuff was crazy too, because I'm not traditionally known as a sports photographer. I'm not. I just don't shoot sports. Now that being said, I've been photographing performers for the last couple of years, and with the Z9 launch about a year and a half ago, I was photographing on this breakdancer, and he was just, I was on AFC, 120 frames a second, and he was doing the helicopter, moving faster than I could run, and it caught his eye every single time. And again, that's well documented. And in this case, this is just fun and interactive. And this is where I'm saying that normally at a 1.2 or 1.4, if I'm on single point focus, when they're animating and laughing in and out of that depth of field, depth of focus, it's a problem. So I give myself room to play, and I put it on the appropriate focus modes that a lot of people don't play with. They're usually just one single point or auto area AF, but you can contain the boxes. I love the fact that I can choose exactly the box that I'm willing to play with, so it works out really well. And as far as the image quality, as you can see, just so you know, every single shot here, no retouching whatsoever. There's no retouching whatsoever. So when you guys asked me to send the photographs in, these weren't even lightroomed. These are straight from the camera.
Really?
Nothing's been done to them whatsoever. So that's the cool thing about Nikon, is that the image quality is legendary, and you can see it for yourself right in front of you, right there.
Well, not only legendary, but as you said, predictably good, because Michael, this is the exact same stacked CMOS sensor that came in the Z9, right?
Yeah.
It's the exact same thing.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that was the biggest, boldest statement we've made to the industry, is taking the shutter out of a camera.
Yes.
And the only reason we can do that is because the engineering of this stacked sensor allows the scan speeds to move so quickly that distortion is basically eliminated. And Jerry, you bring up the customizable box. The other thing, boxes for AF, the other thing is inherently now on release, the Z8 will take advantage of firmware 2.0 and 3.0 upgrades that came with the Z9 that's already built into the Z8.
Yeah.
So you have all the customizability and control you could possibly want. Jerry and I sit through sessions on which buttons to control and customize.
Yeah.
You can make this camera react and do whatever it is you want it to do.
Yeah.
And those video specs, I had to say them so many times, I will never forget them for the rest of my life. 8K NRAW at up to 60 frames per second, which is 12-bit, internal in the camera, as well as ProRes RAW 4K 60 frames per second, also internal. In
4K 120.
4K 120.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
and 4K 120 H.265, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yes.
So
And
you-
ProRes 422.
And ProRes 422.
And C3PO.
And C3PO.
all to the card.
Yes.
All direct to the
R2D2 coming in a
card.
firmware update.
You don't need any other devices to make that happen. It goes direct to card.
Because that's the thing, I feel like a lot of mirrorless cameras have very impressive video specs, but the asterisk is like to an external recorder. With this camera, they're basically all internal,
Right.
which is another way to lighten up a rig. Actually, on the note of rig, I feel like we've had this kind of lingering in the forefront, and I just wanted to chat about it a little bit. This is just like an example of a video sort of rig that we have set up, but this handle on the other side here, this is a Nikon handle. Could you tell us a little bit about like what this guy does?
Yeah, the MCN10 is a grip that came from the actual camera. The parts came from the camera, so instead of having to reach the camera for the rig inside the rigging, you can be on the outside or on a tripod handle and be able to control all the aspects of the camera, from autofocus to settings, right from this piece right here. It's ingenious.
Yes.
Because it'll feel just like the camera when you're using it in other situations.
And literally right before we went live, I was informed that, so the Z8 has got two USB-C ports, one dedicated for power delivery and one for like connectivity options. And in the video we did yesterday, I really only mentioned how you could get like a USB-C to Ethernet dongle if you wanted to like do tethered shooting. But right now, this is actually, if you want to control this, the cable is running from that one connectivity USB-C port to the handle.
Into the communication.
And you still have,
I feel like I'm
Vanna.
I was going to say, It's got a very Wheel of Fortune vibe.
I was laughing at myself.
And so that means that you could still have, like, if you were shooting video and you wanted a V-mount battery, you could have one USB-C port for power delivery, and then if you've got a really complicated rig, you could have the handle sitting in one corner with another cable running to that. So having two USB-C ports is actually not very common, and you don't realize how much it can kind of bottleneck you until you try to do more than one thing with it, obviously. But with this, you have that option. That's actually something, so could the Z9 technically do something like this, or would
the
you still
Z9's
have
got
that?
the single port, but it's also got an Ethernet port, and part of the big differences between the camera and the robust size of the Z9 and something that's more balanced for someone who's looking for a bigger package, and certainly flagship durability. So having those two ports is, again, the genius of the engineers to say, how can we maximize bringing the size of the camera down to be more compact, but utilize all the technologies, and to be able to power the camera from there, or to be able to, something as simple as Ethernet, that's huge for a lot of photographers. So again, versatility and the abilities are as powerful as our flagship.
No, it's amazing. I want to kind of go back to our experiences shooting with the camera, because when we got this camera a week or two ago, we went on location to it. I should say locations. It almost felt like we were like speed dating shooting locations. It was just like boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
But we started on a helicopter first, where I left my body and just had to go to my happy place. But then we did the wedding shoot, we did the equestrian shoot, and then we went to a restaurant for shooting. What were some of your favorite setups and like photos and videos that you got? Kind of what that leaned into the strengths of this camera. Like I don't want to lead you to your own, but you were just showing me before how you were shooting through like a dirty window, autofocusing on the face of someone who was far away.
And
as Jerry, I believe it was you again who walked in front of it, but as you passed in front of it, it still kept the focus on that person.
Insane.
So I don't know if you had another example, but like, were there any other shooting setups that we had?
I mean, that we had, the dirty window was another one, by the way. It was insane, like just shooting through a dirty window. Usually when you shoot through a window, the camera is kind of confused on what to focus on. And it just knew to, when we were shooting the stable, it knew what to, the horse and the equestrian were just sharp, tack sharp.
I mean, bring some Windex, is what we're saying.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
No, it was excellent. I was really
all the
putting
money
it, I
you
was
saved
putting
on
that,
Windex by not having to.
I was putting that autofocus to the test, because that's something, again, like that's something that I've never been able to rely on ever, especially at a live, I'm shooting live events. So there are people constantly walking in front of the lens constantly. So I mean, even when a bridal party comes down the aisle for a ceremony, I will never have it on autofocus, because a bridesmaid comes down, walks in front of the lens to go sit down, bridesmaid comes down, walk in front of the lens to sit down. I can't wait to put it to the test at an actual wedding as well. Like I mean, right away, like I'm thinking of certain scenes where, on an actual day, that this thing the autofocus will completely just make the day so much easier.
So the Z8 will be coming to your next wedding shoot?
Oh, I mean, have you met me?
Now, on the note of lenses, obviously you have the Nikon Z system of lenses available, but we were shooting, we had so many lenses I lost track, but you were talking about was it the 85 millimeter 1.2? 1.2.
Yeah. Which I was mostly on, because I really was putting this thing to the test, and I stayed on 1.2 mostly the entire shoot. Yeah,
I'm trying to remember in the helicopter. Once again, it's just I went into a fugue state. I don't
wasn't
really
on
remember.
that.
But
When you were hanging out of that
the one I was
helicopter, it was
dangling
kind
out
of
of.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yes. The
your
thing you have to
face.
do for
Your
the
face was a meme.
There's a reason in the video. The only video you see of anyone in the helicopter is you looking very suave and debonair, just like leaning out, taking a picture, whereas I'm just like. It's
funny.
memeable.
It's funny because as you remember, we are only allowed one lens. So for me, people ask me often, well, if you only had one lens for the rest of your life, what would it be? And I'm like, well, all right. Well, it's like saying, what's your favorite movie? I'm like, well, if you only had one lens, especially in that environment, I'm going to use a 24 to 120 f4.
Yes.
And a lot of people talk about the faster lenses and all that kind of stuff. The 24 to 120 f4 is that beautiful all-rounder. It's great for a ceremony. It's great for a reception. It's a good event camera, and because we couldn't change lenses, of course, we weren't allowed to change lenses. So while we're up in the helicopter, I could go wide, I could go close. and I was popping my lens through the little window there. That's when we're going for that long trip, but the doors were completely off at one point. One of my favorite shots of the helicopter shoot were the multiple exposures. So I put it in. Yeah. So the lighting wasn't perfect in the sense that we weren't like in the morning hours or the very, very late hours. So I'm like, let me put this on black and white. So I love the black and white picture control that we actually have. So the black and whites in camera, I think, are second to none. And the fact that when you're doing a multiple exposure, it was quite hard because I was photographing the city skyline, and I'm predicting the negative space that I've got. The cool thing about multiple exposures, so if you look at it over here, so this is black and white out of camera, not touched whatsoever, okay? Pretty tough to get the horizon line all perfect. I'm assuming you're going to get to maybe a multiple exposure soon. So what I did was I photographed the bottom of the sky, and then the good thing about the multiple exposure in the Z8 system is that it turns into a horse. No.
In camera.
That's sorcery.
In camera. So the cool thing about it is that when you take that first shot of a multiple exposure, it's ghosted. You can see the image. So whereas before you would struggle a little bit, but then you can just turn the camera around. I turned it 180 degrees, and then I took the shot, and then I get this beautiful in-camera multiple exposure. So the multiple exposure is a really underrated thing that not many people use.
Yeah, that was literally right after we got off the helicopter. You showed me in camera that you had just gotten that, and it was just sorcery. Sorcery's the only word for it.
That's the genius of Jerry. And I swear to you, I'm in a helicopter with all those other things we're thinking about, and he turns the camera upside down. I'm like, what is he doing? And then it registered in my brain. He's being creative. He's being Jerry.
That was fun.
So, kind of on a similar note, when we were actually just looking in the viewfinder and checking the photos, everything looked great, but was there anything that surprised either of you when you actually sat down at your computer to either edit or just take a look at anything? Was there anything that you didn't expect to get that you did, or anything that surprised you in the final images or videos?
So here's the thing, I want to say that something really surprised me, but because I've been so used to the quality of the Z9, I got exactly what I wanted and what I expected, and that is complete crispness of everything that I wanted. Like if I was shooting at f1.2, everything was perfectly sharp all the time. The colors were great out of camera. For me, because I don't shoot lots of sports, to be able to photograph someone like a horse jumping over what do they call those things? I don't know. The obstacle course things, the woody, the panel thingies, whatever they are. I don't really care. But to be able to just put the camera on motor drive, 30 frames a second. And every shot was perfectly tack sharp at 1.2 or whatever the aperture that I was shooting, which was shallow. For me, that was fantastic because I was testing it where basically I was really down low, wide angle, and I've got nothing but sky in there. And the horse comes in for a split second and then jumps over, and it grabbed the focus straight away, and I ripped out many, many shots very, very quickly. So for me, I continued to be excited and surprised at the fact of a genre that I'm not used to, of movement in sports or whatever, the fact that everything is sharp. Whereas before, if I did any kind of movement shots, it would be tougher to do, pre the system.
Gotcha. Was there anything similar for you, Sharrone? I'm sure the autofocus was the big thing, but was there anything else that when you were looking at the video surprised you? Or?
I mean, I'm still experiencing the camera altogether, like the beauty of the camera altogether. So there are a lot of features that are on this camera that I'm not used to. I think I mentioned also the fact that you can crop in. Like you can punch in to see what you're shooting while you're recording, which is something special. I'm not used to that. I don't know if other cameras do that.
Some other cameras can, but surprisingly not everyone can. But obviously, yes, it's very nice. Like even if you're composing, to make sure that
you're in focus.
Yes.
Yeah. So
because on a viewfinder screen, it's sometimes a little tricky.
Exactly. Especially if something's far away.
Yes, like the guy's face through the foggy window.
Or if you're shooting through silky curtains.
Yes, exactly. Now, Michael, you already kind of gave the highlight features of like the burst modes on this, 20 frames per second maximum in RAW. If you're cool doing 11 megapixel JPEGs, it's 120 frames per second. There's a lot of obviously flagship features in this, but one thing that has come up also a lot is people asking, where does this fit if the Z9 still exists, because people look and there's such a huge overlap of the cameras. I felt like a broken record in the video saying, if you like the Z9, you're going to like this. But what would you say, like, now that the Z8 is available to pre-order from B&H, who would you say is the client for the Z9 versus who do you see getting the Z8?
It's a great question and one that should be answered. I mean, the form factor alone of the Z9 stands by itself. The battery grip is built in. It's a bigger battery, longer battery life is one of the bigger things. Within the design of the Z9, there's an airflow system. That's how we get to the spec 8K recording over 2 hours, where this is 4K recording, I believe, up to 2 hours in the Z8. We always say in the office, people who buy the Z9 are going to know they need the Z9. That durability factor, not that the Z8 is not durable, it's got a lot of the same protection, sealing for climate conditions, rain, etc. But again, the smaller form factor, smaller battery. The EN-EL15C is the battery, which is the same battery within the EN-EL system from the D850. So that graduation of batteries, those batteries still work. You brought up lenses before, and I think it's just so critical to remind people that a lot of the basis for the Z system was the Z mount that came out with it. It's 55 millimeter mount, which is huge because the light gathering capability, the flange back distance, they make a big difference. So when we just casually talk about an 85 1.2 or a 50 millimeter 1.2 or any of these lenses that we've come out with, the 1.8s, the S series, the sharpness edge to edge is insane. And I think the mount is going to tell a bigger story as we continue to move forward. We keep introducing tons of lenses now, and we got a great roadmap of lenses, and that was one of the big things people said up front. All the fast glass for sports, the fast glass for portrait, the wide angles for landscapes are all there. I pulled this off, and if we have a shot at being able to see in the camera, everybody's going to ask, does it have the same sensor shield as the Z9? It absolutely does. So again, imagine we're shaving off the bottom, giving you the versatility, giving you the option to add the battery pack for greater height. So if I'm going out with my 800 millimeter 6.3 to photograph birds, I may want that extra grip and extra battery power out in the field. So, versatility. If I'm rigging on mounts, I think Jerry has said it, I've heard him say it before. It's a little harder to rig a Z9 when you have all the rigs out for the smaller form factor. So, to me, this is a little bit of everything for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, once again, the modularity of it, I think, lends it. The Z9, I'm assuming, is the person who knows I need the most battery life all the time. And also the Z9 is a little bit more, I know that this is fully sealed and gasketed, the Z8, but the Z9 has a slightly higher weather sealing rating, is that correct?
The durability is there. It's got two similar card slots. That means everything. Yep. The card slots, two CF Express slots. So people carrying, basically one form of memory and the readers. Because of the size and compact, you've got CF Express as well as an SD port. So there are some of those subtle differences that may play into somebody's decision.
Well, I'll skip ahead a little bit because there was one question that did come up that I don't know if you can answer here, but does the SD card slot affect the burst and buffer performance compared to the Z9 with the CF Express slots? Like, are there any limitations if you have
There's a lot that will affect the buffer speeds, and that's why we have all kinds of high efficiency modes for shooting in RAW. When you're shooting RAW and JPEG and filtering out to both card slots, the biggest thing I could say is when you're at B&H shopping, look for the pro grade cards, the high speed cards. This camera can be as great as you want it to be as long as you put the right cards in. And of course, you can use XQD, but they're not as fast as the cards. So everything affects the speeds and the buffer. But within the structure of RAW, you have lossless compression, you have two high efficiency modes, and when you grab compression in RAW, you can basically shoot unlimited without stopping. And then I kind of go in the middle range of high efficiency, a little less compression, and then you can still keep going on for hundreds of images, which I really never have to do. But photographing the finish of the Kentucky Derby, coming down the stretch, hitting the finish line, jubilation, way past the finish line, you don't want that camera to ever stop. So like Jerry said about changing focus points and focus features, I do the same thing when it comes to how I'm shooting and how much burst I can get out of the cards or to the cards.
You just remind me of one thing. Like you don't necessarily need to think of the Z8 as like where does it compromise in the Z9? Because the Z8 obviously has some advantages, and one of them is you can shoot an HEIF on the Z8, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whereas the Z9 you cannot, at least.
Yeah, it's a file format that is really built for display viewing, where you can see the color shifts. You're not going to see that on the back of the camera, but so yeah, we're even adding more features to the Z8. There's focus softening, portraits, skin softening. You can adjust, within portraits, the hue and color control. And you know, I will go back to
Video
when you
too.
ask everybody what, I hear this constantly from filmmakers or still photographers, the color that this camera generates right out of the gate without editing is actually shocking people into thinking they've done some editing. I mean, you guys can answer that better than I can.
Yeah, no, I truly thought when we were seeing the photos, because you both obviously shot your photos and videos, and then later we got those assets to put in our video, and I assumed you had done extensive touching up of the photos at least, but you're saying some of those were just actually straight from the camera?
Yeah, totally raw. I mean, that's it. I mean, I shoot raw in JPEG all the time, and I literally just low res them and sent them to you, and that was it. So
low res, enough of that.
or whatever format that you would need. But can I just say, as far as the cameras, I've had a lot of questions literally in the last 24 hours because of the release. And where does this sit into the ecosystem of ever? I've spoken to sports photographers. Now, you're going to get a sports photographer who wants that big grip and the vertical grip and that strength and that power and that durability and all that stuff. And then they're going to have one on their hip and they want something smaller. Well, there lies the Z8. If you shoot weddings like myself, you're going to want two bodies that are the same. And even though that I really enjoy the 6s and the 7s, you know, in my world in the last couple of years, for me, I need two cameras, and I like them to be the exact same form factor. So although the Z9 has had a really great place in the ecosystem of what I've been doing, I'm like the Z8 is just a perfect opportunity. If you don't shoot professionally and you want to actually just have one camera that does a bit of everything, this is the sweet spot, no doubt about it.
Yeah, because when I forgot if I said this before already, but I feel like a lot of mirrorless cameras, you know, that can shoot photo and video, you can kind of tell implicitly, like if their strength is leaning a little bit more on the photography side, or this is a little bit more of a video-centric camera. This is probably the most 50-50 straight down the middle camera I've seen, where if you are a dedicated filmmaker or video shooter, you could be happy with this camera without even touching the photography specs, and then vice versa. You could not touch the ProRes RAW or the NRAW and still have an amazing 45 megapixel stacked sensor, insanely high burst mode. So it really, I feel like, covers both bases. Was there anything, obviously, we were so appreciative of Nikon and the smorgasbord of shooting situations you let us play with, but was there anything that either of you, as you were playing with the camera, thought like, ooh, now that I know I can do this, this is a specific shooting situation I really want to try, like the next time, whether it's with like weddings or portrait photography or anything else? Was there any feature or any shooting scenario that you really wanted to try with the Z8?
So, do you want to go first?
Yeah.
So there's something. So when I was photographing the equestrian, sort of jumping over the obstacles there, I first thought, well, wait a second, I can customize the auto area AF box.
Yeah.
So I'm like, and I'm shooting a reflection. So I've got my camera right down to the water, right? I've got this flipped out, so now I can go right down to the water. Normally I'd be lying down to do this. I'm in the mud. So, and then I'm like, well, wait a second, why don't I give myself every chance for the focus system to make sure that I can get it? So I'm really wide, I'm really low, I've got the reflection of the water, and then I customize a little box so that my focus point was just here, because I know that they're going to run at that system. So even though that I can put the camera on auto area AF, the ability to refine the area and give it more chance to be spot on was amazing to me. And I'm like, well, next time I'm at a ceremony and I've got the bride and groom walking down the aisle, I can customize the box, eliminate the families, and literally say, I just want the aisle in focus.
Yeah.
So that was an epiphany for me, because I just wouldn't normally think to do that. I'm like, oh, that's just a sports thing. I'm like, wait a second, no, that's a really cool thing that I can use at a ceremony, you know?
So it actually reshapes even the way you would think about composing a shot, just because you know you have these options.
Well, it just
available.
makes it easier. And it's funny because I would often pride myself on, I've got to, like John Bon Jovi said, every poet needs to paint, right? Like,
Yep.
no, like just take the paint away. Like you can drive a car manually and feel like you're moving the car and you're doing it, or you can put it on automatic. So for me, it's just making my life a lot easier to get to the shot more quicker and more an efficient way. So I'm learning to rely on the camera a lot more than I used to. Whereas I would feel like I have to drive it because I want to create it.
Yep.
So now I spend more time composing and relating to my subjects and connecting with them and building trust, rather than worrying about things that the camera can do.
That's so refreshing for someone who's been doing this for 30 years to hear. Like, it's okay, you don't have to shoot fully manual. Like, you can trust the camera
Right.
to help with certain things. But on the note of tools, as kind of a video shooter first, one thing I love is all of the video assist features you get in this, because once again, a lot of times mirrorless cameras will give you like high resolution shooting modes or different flavors of log, but on this camera you get, focus peaking, obviously, but you get waveforms, you get zebras, you get a lot of video assist features that technically Nikon did not have to put in, but it's very great to have them there. Do you see, Mike, Nikon progressively becoming more of a consideration for dedicated video shooters? I feel like Nikon's DNA has been as a photography brand, but really with the Z line, it seems like Nikon is much more aggressively pursuing video, because the specs you get in these things are about as high end as you can get in a mirrorless camera.
No, it's a very important statement, because when you're looked at as a brand, what are you looked at for? And certainly the legacy of still, photography is what Nikon is all about. Most people don't realize that in the D90 we actually had the first video feature within a camera of this form factor. So historically it's always been there. But now we're just being, as you said, very aggressive to give the video shooter, the filmmaker, every tool they need, like timecode or the waveform, to be able to do their job, to be able to customize the displays exactly the way they want to have all that information right in front of them. And of course, when you're dealing with the flip out screen and the ability to rig up the camera, I think that's an even bigger statement for the Z8 than the Z9. The Z9 really made a big statement about video, but the Z8 I think is really targeted towards that hybrid video shooter.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. You reminded me of a question that was asked, because obviously, once again, we do have people had a lot of questions about this camera. Most of them, obviously, were boiled down specifically to why should I get the Z9 versus the Z8 now that they're both out. One thing that I think you addressed kind of already, because we've talked about autofocus a lot, but a lot of people who are considering this camera are D850 users looking to maybe finally make the plunge and asking how the focusing system compares to the D850. I know you talked about the Z9, but for people upgraded from older Nikon cameras, what can they expect?
We didn't really dig deep into it, but cameras like the D850, D5, D6 had something like called group autofocus. Very capable, very fast, very accurate. When you start to move towards mirrorless and you realize, again, the frame itself, virtually the entire frame, you can find that focus point. So when Jerry talks about pinpoint focus and the ability to track, I remember with the Z9, I posted a picture of 2 oyster catchers going up into the left side of the frame. A picture I would never be able to make, and people go, well, that doesn't really impress me. It impresses me because the focus system did all that for me. It found the birds, moved up into the corner for me. So if you want to expand the focus area, if you want to expand the speeds, if you want to really take the next step up to a more robust autofocus system that is faster, more secure, and definitely more capable, it doesn't diminish what the D850 can do, and I don't want to interfere with any D850 people out there that love their D850s, but you may want to think about progressing into the mirrorless technology now.
Can I add to that? I was involved in the D850 campaign from the global perspective, so I shot for the wedding and the fashion industry, and so affectionately it's part of my history that I shot with that camera as part of that campaign. I don't own it anymore. And you might say, well, why? I'm like, well, I held on to every camera and every lens for years and years and years. And then I'm like, I just traded it all in, and I was all in with mirrorless. And for those who don't shoot mirrorless, you don't know what you're missing out on. So there's a romantic notion attached to devices or cameras that you own, that you love, that you've photographed incredible shots with. But I'm like, and I think I said this in another interview, like when people ask me, well, is mirrorless a thing? That's like saying, is the internet going to take off? Like,
is it a fad, right?
Is it a fad, or is AI, whatever? Like, I'm like, guys, you don't know what you're missing out on. And we discussed this many, many times, but I want to tell people the importance of understanding what you can do in mirrorless, apart from obvious. So with this camera, you've got 2 function buttons, and you've got other function buttons as well. But the way I program my camera is that I can put my eye to the camera. Obviously, I'm seeing a glorified TV, but it looks like an optical viewfinder, so that's clear and perfect. Then what I've done is my top function button, it accesses all my menu items. So my menu are all the shortcuts of things that I use, both photo and video. So I can quickly just press that button, change my white balance, my crop ratio, do whatever I do. While I'm in shooting mode, that bottom button is preview mode, playback. So I can play the image that I just shot with. In bright sun, I can see it clearly, and then while I'm in playback mode, this button turns into 100% magnification. So imagine if you were shooting with a non-mirrorless camera, not to sort of degrade any cameras that are non-mirrorless, they have a place, but the fact is that we can shoot so quickly and efficiently doing those buttons, And what I do is I put my safe handheld shutter speed, I pick the desired aperture, and then I change my focus ring to be ISO. And I'm like, well, if you were shooting with non-mirrorless, you would take a shot and do that face when you're over 40 and you look at the camera,
yes.
which I am. And so now I just turn my dial, my ISO, until it looks good, take a shot, preview it, 100% magnification, I'm done. Like, you can't do that with non-mirrorless. Now, you add all the other features, it's even better.
Well, because you also said something, we were chatting on our location shoot. You just said, like, talking about the camera being a tool for the photographer or the filmmaker, and you said just at the end of the day, this is a better tool.
Sure.
Because even if you can still obviously get beautiful image quality out of your D850 or really any camera you're shooting with, like what you just described are ways that like you can just either more reliably get good images or get a higher quantity of them. Like that was one thing that I realized towards the end of our shooting, like I was not taking advantage of any of the function buttons, and right towards the end, I was starting to realize, like, oh wait, I would assign this to that button if I could. And then once again, you dropped the camera straight from our hands again. And we had to go back. So this has all been once again hugely helpful. I do want to get into a few questions that were asked. I'm going to try. We kind of have naturally addressed a lot of them just over the course of this discussion. Once again, the focusing system. I was really hoping for built-in GPS. The snap bridge on my Z7 Mark II isn't really good for GPS geotagging. Will it work with the older Nikon GP1 GPS unit? That is a very
good question. I'm going to have to look into that one. I believe that port or the way it connected was a little bit different, so I'd have to dig into that one. But it does have GPS built in, and certainly, all the latest technologies.
Also, I know I've essentially asked you to rephrase this in as many ways as possible, but the Z6 and the Z7 do use a different autofocus system compared to the Z9 and the Z8. So for those coming from like the Z7, what are some of, or Z6, what are some of the autofocusing modes that they can get that they weren't getting in that?
You still have a lot of the similar modes like pinpoint, as Jerry mentioned before, and the ability to do wide area boxes or small boxes, but this is where you elevate into the system of scene recognition and having 3D tracking, things that the other systems don't have, and now you elevate it to that really high-end autofocus capability of speeds that we're just seeing that are just unbelievable.
Gotcha.
And accuracy.
Yes.
Speed without the accuracy doesn't really mean anything.
Well, they were all out of focus, but I took a lot of them. Some of these might be more rapid fire. Does the Z8 have an I can never pronounce it.
Anti-aliasing
yes.
filter? No, we've removed those over the last generations of cameras. So.
Gotcha.
Yep. Sharpness all plays a part of it.
Regarding frame rates, we've kind of talked about the headline ones, but some people have had questions about, can you shoot true 24 frames per second on this, or is it 23.973, whatever that is?
That's a great question. That's a video question, I would assume, right?
Yes, for video shooting.
I mean, what's 0.3 between friends?
We might have to dig a little bit more into the specs for that one specifically.
The website, Nikon USA's got the perfect spec right there.
On the menu.
But it's 24 frames per second.
Right, on the menu when you're, right, it says 24. It doesn't say 23.97.
Yeah. So you better believe I screenshotted the spec sheet.
But it's funny though, video has lots of anomalies. We say 4K, but it's 3840 or it's,
yes.
I mean, there's 1080, but there's all these little anomalies that we've all learned to accept that it just, you round it off, it's easier, but yeah, 24 frames, 23, I mean, yeah.
I guess that was mostly playing an issue because you also refreshed my memory, Michael, that that this has time code support as well, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I suppose if you had a multi-camera Z8 video shoot and wanted time code support, but I guess in that case they would all be at the same speed.
Yeah.
But when you talk about frame rate for still, not to steal it, but one of the things I love about it is customizing the speed. So if 20 is too much, you go to continuous low. If you don't want continuous low to be 8, you can make it 14 or 15. You can adjust the frame rates in the various modes that you can shoot in, or you can go single frame.
Yeah.
One thing I didn't realize that the camera can do actually video, and I was shown this by the guys, is that you can do focus A and B points. So you can program that, like you're in focus and then rack focus over there,
yeah.
but you can predetermine that. and then you can basically put it in rather.
Really?
Yes.
I don't, so
Yes.
do you just hit a button, or is it like you zoom and it only won't go further than
No,
that?
you've got to basically put the point that you
Well,
want.
yeah, you set it up.
Put the A point, put the B point, and then you can basically press a button and it'll
And it will do that.
It'll do that. So that's an unsung hero that is not mentioned enough, I think.
There was another issue with shutter speed, I believe, because I know it can hit, is it 1/32,000th of a second?
It's the same on this camera. Flash sync will be 200th of a second, and certainly you have high-speed sync or hyper-sync technology that the camera will work with to go above the 200th of a second.
But if you have a flash mounted on it, the shutter speed changes, correctly? It can't go quite as high, or?
It'll automatically go to 200 of a second with a normal X or flash sync. But if you set it to high-speed sync, you can go up to, I believe, 8,000th of a second.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So in your camera, you've got to put speed FP or something. Like, it's one of the first things you change in your camera, so that does high-speed sync.
Because you did, I was downstairs for most of it, but you were doing sync flash photography during the wedding shoot, right?
No, I was doing it with the chef actually.
Oh.
Yeah, it was with the chef. So
I was lounging on the beach that whole time, so I missed that.
you were eating steak.
Earning my paycheck that day.
No worries.
We also have, where was it? Oh, another quick fire technical one if you can answer it. Will this camera record internally while streaming out of the HDMI port?
Ooh, that's a good question. We'll have to look into
I
that
think
one. I've never done that before.
I
I don't believe you can, but I'd like to be able to confirm
didn't we have
that.
a Hollyland system hooked up that at one point that you were?
Yeah.
Although you
You're
were taking
streaming
pictures.
wirelessly,
Yes.
and you're recording, so yes.
I think I've done it. Yeah, I think I've done it with the Z9. I've got to think about it, but I mean, technically, if you're
But I don't know if you're live streaming doing that. You're streaming to another device to a monitor.
so go again. Tell me the specs again. Did you say?
Just if you can record internally while streaming out of the HDMI port.
I'm sure I've done that.
You've done it
I'm
with
pretty
Hollyland, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, Hollyland will. I mean, what I normally do is I'll ping the whatever. If I want to actually record my viewfinder, I'll use a Hollyland transmitter and receiver, and it'll beam it out. But if you want to put it through an Atomos, monitor recorder, and you want to put it in and out and all that kind of stuff, if you can see it and you can ping it out, absolutely. You've got it in your recorder, and then you've got your out on your recorder, and
With
of course
Atomos,
you can
is
ping it
that-
out. So
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
it
right.
definitely records because
Yeah.
when we were doing our shoot, we had the Atomos on our cameras.
yeah, we do
and,
both. Yeah.
Yeah, because we didn't
We were-
have an SSD hooked up to the
When we were
Atomos.
doing
Must have been
when we were
recording.
doing the shoot for this camera, we had
Yeah.
the Atomos on the cameras and it was recording internally.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So it sounds like yes.
Yes.
The
We have to.
answer is yes.
We have to talk about that.
There were some other questions. One of them was on focus stacking, which now I'm trying to remember if we did any there. Obviously, you did the double exposure in the helicopter, but focus stacking in macro photography, people had questions about. Is there? You'll have to refresh my memory on this, as I'm a little rusty on my Nikon Z lenses. But what macro lenses are available for the Z system?
You got the 55, you got the 105 2.8, which is probably the most popular because of the working distance.
Yeah.
But you've got two Z lenses now, and of course with an FTZ adapter, you can use the older micro lenses that we have in our line, the micro Nikons.
Gotcha. Let me just see.
And check out
But
Nikon
to answer
Ambassador.
the question,
Yeah.
focus stacking is the same as the Z9.
Yeah.
Okay,
Focus stacking
so-
capabilities, yep.
And
Awesome.
Joey Terrell, Nikon Ambassador, if you want to see some insane macro work with focus stacking, he's the guy.
So you can do it all in camera, just change it slightly and it will stack them all.
It'll stack them all, and then with third-party software, you put it all together.
Yes.
That's it, yeah.
See, that's one thing I've just never trusted. I always want to just like take the, not most boring, but just like the most static image possible and then play with it in post. Like when you showed me that double exposure of the flip thing, like I could just do that in camera and not have to sit in front of my computer for 15 minutes to figure out how to do that. So that is a personal issue on my end. This is an interesting question, and it might be a very easy answer, but are there any performance benefits of the Z8 over the Z9? Is there anything you're gaining with it?
Performance benefits, if you're talking about speeds and things like that, no, but as I mentioned before, you've got skin softening in this camera, you talked about the high file, the toning for skin rendition, are all in the Z8 right now.
And I would argue
That's new to this camera.
I would argue it's not a performance benefit per se, but I would argue having two USB-C ports, unless you know you're going to be shooting tethered with an Ethernet cable exclusively, I would argue having that flexibility is arguably a benefit. The fact you can attach something like this now with it, you could still use Ethernet if you want. It's actually a nice little bonus that you do get with this. We've actually answered a lot of the questions here. One thing that I was just kind of curious about from both of your perspectives as professionals in wedding photography and videography, as well as portrait photography and other things. Do you have any advice on what you would give to people who want to get into this? Like, it can be just about like gear that you'd recommend, or just any sort of work ethic tips or tricks, or just anything for people who are interested to kind of get to where you are here at a B&H live stream.
I've always said that repetition, experience, and practice will always be your best teacher. And I think too many of us want the shortcut. Just like this, we're on YouTube, we're learning stuff.
Yeah.
There's nothing like touching and feeling the gear. There's nothing like actually going out there and shooting. And I remember like a wedding photographer came up to me and said, hey, I'm not getting any better. I've been shooting for 3 years. And I said, well, how many weddings have you shot? He says, 21. I said, you've shot for 3 weeks. So repetition, experience, and practice will be your best teacher. Understanding your gear so that that's not an obstacle, and slowing down. You just got to slow down. Too many of us rush. We think it betrays a lack of confidence, where I think it's the opposite. And the Army in the US has a saying, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Take your time, enjoy the ride, enjoy the process. I'm all about the process, and you get to the result a lot quicker.
Awesome. Sure.
Yeah, that's something that I always say as well. I just think everything moves so fast these days, and we see so much on social media, and I think priorities are kind of shifted rather to the from the art to the views, the likes, stuff like that. But for me, I think a big piece of advice is to find inspiration, especially for wedding filmmakers, in find other sources of inspiration other than other wedding filmmakers. So for me, it's been fashion photography and music and watching movies or certain directors. It's things like that. So it's not always inspiration from other wedding filmmakers, and I think that helps a lot.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then with 39 years of experience?
Yeah, I think I'm going to hammer on what Jerry alluded to about knowing your camera and really trusting what the technology has to offer. I think when I try to outsmart the camera, it always reminds me that it's a lot smarter and a lot quicker. Back in the days of having to manual focus for a subject coming at me and track with a manual turn, I'm doing more things better than I've ever done before, and allowing the system to do what it wants to do. Like photographing birds, I let auto area take over and it finds the bird. If the bird's too far away, I'll customize the box. But I've also found while I let it run on its own, things like baseball, I'm customizing boxes for just about every situation. I've got one focus button in the front to activate a dynamic. I've got another focus in the back to activate a long vertical for a double play at second base. And then the natural system would be the small square, so a play at home plate gives me another option. So I'm bouncing around the camera quite a bit. But have fun with it. Like you say, the things you love are the things you want to keep going back to. When we're done with this, I'm going right back out to the osprey nests over the next 3-4 months while the osprey are here on Long Island. And I'm just going to keep fighting with getting out there and trying to find something different that I haven't shot before. And it's
awesome.
just keep it fun.
There's actually one last quick question that I very selfishly wanted to ask, because it came up in the comments a lot. As a Nikon representative, Nikon or Nikon?
Well, here's the debate. First of all, when someone's saying about Nikon, I've got a Nikon camera, it is a Nikon camera. But there's a person here on the panel that debates with me all the time, and he's going to say that I spoke to the number 2 person at Nikon, and he said Nikon as well. Now, if you're Australian, you can say Nikon. If you are from another country, you could say Z8
Yes, the
instead
Nikon
of Z8. In my position, all I care about is that you buy this beautiful camera, put your order in at B&H today, and
Tell us the price too.
I was just going to say.
well, $39.99. I mean, to me, you talk about the most sweet thing about the camera is the price point, along with all those features. So you're getting a lot of bang for the buck here, I think.
No, I think it's a great camera. We had a lot of fun playing with it, and I think with that we can kind of.
You missed
sum
the
it up.
1080 stuff.
The 1080 stuff?
Yeah,
Which 1080 stuff?
with the ProRes files.
Close with
that's
this.
right.
This is
Yes.
great.
Yes.
This is your
Sorry.
story.
Yes,
Tell us.
I don't want to paraphrase your story for you. It was one last cool little surprise that we got.
Yeah, it was an unexpected little surprise. So we were shooting ProRes RAW this this shoot for the camera. And I'm laying down the footage on my timeline, and I'm like, what is going on right now? And I realized that it was 1080 footage I was laying on the timeline. So what happens is when you're shooting ProRes, the camera actually creates the same file in also a 1080, so that you can, rather than having to create proxies in post, it just saves you all that time, and you can work with the 1080 files that the camera already creates for you as you're shooting. And then just replace it with the ProRes RAW files when you're done shooting. So that was a lovely little surprise.
It was full of happy surprises.
Unexpected.
I would like to thank you guys all for coming and sharing your experiences and expertise with the camera. Once again, if you are in the New York City area, you have one less hour to do it, but you can still swing by and demo the camera here and play with it and see some of the features that we've been talking about. Once again, $399. It's going to come in a couple of different kit options as well. Check our website for all of that. But you can pre-order it now. Yes.
Yes, you can.
So go ahead and do that. Once again, thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Nick from B&H, and we will see you next time.